In Suffocating, she wept. When he uncovered her, his blood ran cold. An oppressive silence hung over the Valley of Stone Refuge. The sun hung in the sky like a red-hot coin, and even the gophers hid in their burrows, fearing this merciless heat. Only rare gusts of wind, like the sighs of the dying, stirred the parched grass stalks, chasing tumbleweeds across the dusty ground. In this dead, scorched silence, any sound was alien, and all the more so was the sound that Silas Jonas' keen ear caught. Silas was a man of rock. His face, carved by wines and seared by the sun, was like a map of all the hardships he had seen. Deep wrinkles on his forehead, like the riverbeds of dried-up rivers, led to his penetrating, slightly squinted eyes. Those eyes, the color of a clear Texas sky, looked at the world with a weary but unwavering resolve. A thick, graying mustache hid the hard line of his mouth, and his hands, thick and sinewy, were covered with calluses that spoke of his hard life as a prospector. Silas Jones was neither a hero nor a villain. He was just another shard in the ruthless mosaic of the Wild West, a man who believed only in himself and his old Colt, which hung on his belt. Silas had been digging for the third straight hour. The shovel scraped against the dry, stony soil, raising clouds of reddish dust. He was searching for silver, a last chance, a final card in his empty deck. The area where he was working was located near an old, abandoned mine that everyone avoided. The locals said that a collapse had once buried 3 miners alive inside, and now it was cursed. Silas scorned these superstitions. To him, a curse was just a word for bad luck, and bad luck, like good luck, was always a matter of chance, not of higher powers. He kept working, ignoring the mystical tales. It was then that he heard it. A sound, barely audible, almost lost in the nose of the wind and his own panting. At first, Silas wrote it off as a mirage, a trick of the ear caused by the heat and fatigue. But the sound repeated, more clearly this time. It was a quiet, muffled sob. The sound came from somewhere behind the massive, crooked planks that boarded up the entrance to the old mine. Silas froze. He wasn't a man who believed in ghosts, but he wasn't a fool either. In this world, a crying person could be more dangerous than any evil spirit. Behind that terror could hide a trap, an ambush, or another misfortune that had come here to take what little he had left. Silas' hand slowly rested on the butt of his Colt. He waited, listening to every rustle. Silence, but then the sob repeated, now more insistent and desperate. There was no aggression or cunning in it, only pure, unbearable grief. Silas clenched his jaw. There had been too much grief in his life for him to walk past someone else's. He wasn't a saint, and he certainly wasn't a hero, but if a person was suffering in that cursed mine, he couldn't leave them alone with that pain. He moved slowly toward the mine, stepping carefully on the small gravel. The creak of his boots seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. With each step, he felt his heart tighten in anticipation. He approached the entrance. The planks were old but sturdy, nailed with thick, rusty spikes. The sob came again, now very close, and a barely audible, broken whisper was mixed in with it. In Suffocating, the voice was female, weak and frightened. Silas made his decision. He lowered his hand from his Colt and raised his shovel. With a heavy blow, he struck one of the planks. The wood cracked but did not give way. He struck again, and again, until, at last, the plank broke, leaving a jagged hole in the wall. A smell of damp earth, mold, and something else, something heavier, wafted from inside. He squeezed through the opening, lowering his head. The entrance was narrow, but inside, the space widened. The light from the opening barely penetrated inward, picking out outlines from the darkness. He lit the kerosene lamp he always carried with him. The yellow, dim light illuminated a small section of the old mining face. In the center of this space, pressed against the wall, was something that looked like a large sack made of rough burlap. The fabric was dark and clung tightly to something. It moved, barely noticeably, as if writhing in agony. A muffled sob came from right beside him, from under the sack. Without hesitation, Silas stepped forward. He lowered the lamp and reached for the burlap. He felt the coarse, stiff fabric under his fingers, through which irregularities protruded, as if there was something underneath. His hands found the edge of the sack, and he pulled. A faint, painful groan came from under the fabric. Silas applied force, and the burlap slid off with a rustle, revealing what had been hidden from the light. What he saw made his blood run instantly cold. Silas knelt in the thick, suffocating darkness of the old mining face. The dim yellow light of his lamp picked out of the gloom something that made everything in his chest go cold. The burlap had slipped away, and he saw a woman, wrapped in the fabric so that she resembled a cocoon. But that wasn't what caused the icy horror. Her face, her hair, her hands, everything was covered in a thick, sticky, tar-like substance. She was smeared from head to toe, as if doused in molasses, but this molasses was a dark brown color and gave off a faint but distinct smell of earth, a crust of clay, mixed with something else, something incredibly dense, that clogged her pores and made every breath a torment. Her eyes, the only clean part of her face, were wide open, full of horror and tears that carved thin, winding paths through the clay mass. This wasn't just a blindfold, it was a living tomb. Silas, who had seen his share of things, from the gutted bodies of prospectors to settlers mutilated with scalps, had never seen such cruelty. This was not a quick death from a bullet or a knife, but a slow, excruciating agony designed to break the will before taking life. He understood the meaning of her words. "I can't breathe," he whispered, tossing the lamp aside. It landed on a pile of gravel, and its light bounced, casting ugly, moving shadows on the walls of the mine. He reached for her, but she recoiled, her body tensing in a spasm of wild, animal fear. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice rough, but with an uncharacteristic softness. He held out his hand, showing his palms, empty, posing no threat. Her eyes, which had recently held only agony, now stared into his, trying to discern something human in his dusty, weathered face. He carefully touched her hand, covered in that fell crust, and she flinched. Inside the sack, she was bound with a rope, so tight that her skin had already turned blue. He took out his old knife with a bone handle from his belt. The blade, sharpened to a razor's edge, glinted in the lamplight. She flinched again, expecting a blow, but he carefully brought the knife to the rope that squeezed her wrists and cut it with one motion. The rope snapped. He did the same with her legs, and the sack loosened. He put the knife away and carefully untied the fabric. When her hands were free, she immediately pressed them to her face, trying to scrape off the clay. Silas saw that her lips were sealed with a thick, dirty cloth. I can't speak," she rasped, trying to force out some sound. He carefully pulled at the edge of the cloth, and it came away, revealing cracked, dry lips. She took a greedy breath, but the air, heavy with the smell of mold, was like poison. Her body shook with a fit of violent coughing. She coughed so hard that it seemed her fragile lungs were about to burst. A fine tremor shook her, a mix of fear, relief, and cold. When she calmed down a little, Silas knelt down. "What's your name?" he asked softly, so as not to scare her more. "Isabella," she replied, her voice weak but clear. He saw that her eyes were full not only of fear, but of a deep, unyielding resolve. She was not broken. She was on the edge, but she had not given up. Her face, as far as he could tell, despite the horrible mask, was quite young. Her raven black hair was matted and stained, but he could imagine how beautifully it would flow if it were clean. Her dress, once beautiful, was now torn, stained, and almost black. Silas realized she needed something to clean herself with. He took a tin flask of water from his saddlebag and held it out to her. "Drink," he said, watching her take it with trembling hands. She didn't drink, but immediately poured a little water onto her palm and began to wash the clay from her face, scraping it away. He saw a clean, pale face under the mask, and this sight caused him no less shock than the mask itself. It was the face of a girl, not a woman who had seen life. "We can't stay here," he said, looking at her. "You need to get out of this place." He offered her his hand, but she recoiled again, struggling to stand on her own. Her legs buckled, and she nearly fell, but he managed to catch her. His hands felt how light and fragile she was, like a twig that could easily be broken. He carefully helped her get out of the narrow mine entrance. The sun blinded her, and she squeezed her eyes shut, groaning in pain. Silas sat her on a rock in the shade and gave her the flask again. She pressed it to her lips, taking large, greedy gulps. After that, she began to speak, her words broken, mixed with coughs and sobs. They grabbed me on the road. My father, he was trying to save me." Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. Silas waited patiently. He saw her trying to find the words to describe the nightmare she had endured. They killed him. Right in front of me. She spoke as if she were reliving the moment over and over. "They said that I would pay for everything." Her words hung in the air. Silas saw her lips trembling and her eyes filling with terror. He waited for her to continue, but she didn't. Isabella suddenly went pale, Her head spun, and she fell limply onto his shoulder. Losing consciousness like a sack, Silas caught her, feeling her fragile body go limp in his arms. There had been too many dangers in his life, but this one, the most fragile of all, seemed the heaviest. He carefully lifted her into his arms, and her hair, which still had remnants of clay, fell onto his shoulder. Her last words echo in his head, that I would pay for everything. Who was she? And what did she have to pay for? An uneasy premonition pierced him like a knife blade, and he knew that this meeting was no accident. This was only the beginning. He was not just a prospector, but a man who had found himself at the center of someone else's trouble. And this was a trouble that would undoubtedly come at a high price. Jacob Bannon woke up with the sun and fell asleep when the first stars lit up in the sky. This life was familiar to him. His ranch, Red Mountain, named for the blood-red cliffs that surrounded it on all sides, was his world. He was a man of his word, a man of action, and his reputation was flawless, like the barrel of his Colt. He was tall and lanky, with broad shoulders that seemed to bear the weight of the world. His hair, like his beard, was the color of pale wheat, and his blue eyes looked at the world with an uncharacteristic softness for these parts. Jacob was a widower. His wife had died of a fever 3 years ago, leaving him alone. And since then his life had become a never-ending cycle of work. He sought neither adventure nor friendship, he just wanted silence. He was just sitting on the porch, sipping bitter coffee, when he noticed a cloud of dust in the distance. At first he wrote it off as a mirage, but the dust was getting closer, and he could make out the silhouette of a rider. When the rider got closer, he recognized him. It was the old prospector, Silas Jones. But something was wrong. Silas was always a loner, and his appearance at Bannon's ranch, with such a sack, was completely unexpected. Silas dismounted, his old horse breathing heavily. He looked tired, and his face, usually hidden under a layer of dust, was pale. Jacob came out to meet him. "Something happened, Silas?" he asked, holding out his hand. He saw that Silas' hands were empty, but he was holding something wrapped in an old cloak to his chest. When Silas unwrapped it, Jacob saw Isabella. She looked as if she had just been pulled from a grave. The clay had hardened on her skin, and her face was as white as chalk. Jacob was stunned. What is it, Silas?" he asked, his voice muffled. "I found her in an old mine," Silas replied, his voice hoarse. "She was wrapped in burlap. She said her father was killed." Jacob looked at Isabella. Her body was motionless, and an expression of terror was frozen on her face. "Come on," Jacob said, opening the door of his house. The house was simple but clean. Inside, it smelled of fresh bread and lavender. He took Isabella from Silas, and he himself poured hot water into a basin and brought a clean towel. "She needs to be cleaned," he said. Silas carefully laid her on the bed, which was covered with a clean, white sheet. Silas and Jacob set to work. They carefully washed the clay from her face and hands, but it wasn't easy. The clay had soaked into her skin, and they had to gently scrub each area. As they worked, Isabella began to regain consciousness. She groaned, and her eyes, full of tears, flew open. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice as faint as the rustle of an autumn leaf. "You're safe," Jacob replied, his voice soft and soothing. "You're on my ranch." She looked at him, her gaze full of distrust. He saw her trying to remember what had happened. They cleaned her and changed her into one of Jacob's clean, old shirts. It was far too big for her, and she looked even more fragile and lost in it. Jacob brought her hot soup and bread. She ate slowly but ravenously. When she finished, she looked at them. "Thank you," she said, and her eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to repay you." Silas waved her off. "No need to thank us," he said. "Just tell us who did this." She flinched. I don't know," she said. There were 3 of them. They attacked us on the road. They took our wagon and all our things. My father, he tried to fight back." Her voice trembled. They said that I would pay for everything." Jacob went to her and sat down. "Who is your father?" he asked softly. "Michael," she replied. "Michael O'Connor." Jacob and Silas exchanged glances. The name Michael O'Connor was familiar to them. He was a local prospector who had found a large vein of gold a few months ago. He was known for his honesty and kindness. They were looking for something," she continued. "They were looking for a map. They thought my father had a map that showed where the gold was." Silas clenched his fists. "So it was because of gold," he said, his voice full of contempt. They killed him because of gold. Isabella nodded. They didn't find the map, she said. My father, he hid it. He said it was somewhere here. In the valley. Silas and Jacob exchanged another look. Do you know where it is? Silas asked. She shook her head. I don't know, she said. He didn't tell me. She was frightened. But there was a spark in her eyes. They'll be back, she whispered. They'll be back to find it. Silas went to the window. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in orange and red. He saw dust rising on the horizon. They're already here, he said. Jacob pulled out his Colt. Stay here, he told Isabella. He looked at Silas. Are you ready? He asked. Silas nodded. He wasn't a hero, he was just a prospector. But he knew he couldn't leave this girl. Silas stood by the window, his eyes narrowed against the bright setting sun that was painting the horizon a bloody red. 3 riders were moving directly toward the ranch, and Silas instantly felt they were bringing trouble. Their silhouettes were sharp against the fiery sky, and he could clearly see that all 3 were armed. The leader, a tall, gaunt man with long black hair, rode in front, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Behind him followed 2 broad-shouldered thugs. One had a beard, and the other, apparently, hadn't had time to shave, and his stubble looked like stiff needles. They're here, Silas said. Turning to Jacob, he was already standing by the table, checking his Colt. Jacob nodded, his eyes cold and calculating. Isabella, stay inside, he ordered. Under no circumstances are you to come out. And don't make a sound. With trembling hands, she hugged Jacob's old shirt to her chest and hid behind a cabinet. Silas and Jacob walked out onto the porch. They stood shoulder to shoulder, 2 completely different men, but united by one goal, to protect. When the riders got closer, they stopped a few yards from the porch. The leader dismounted, and his boots scraped on the gravel. He was dressed in a black leather vest and a white shirt that was carelessly unbuttoned at the chest. His face, etched with wrinkles, was cold as stone. Names, he said, his voice low and sharp, like the crackle of a dry twig. We're looking for something. Something you seem to have found. You speak in riddles, stranger, Jacob replied, his hand not moving but ready. I don't know what you're talking about. The leader grinned. Don't pretend. We know you found the girl who disappeared with her father, and we know she's with you. We came for the map. Silas took a step forward. What map? We don't know anything about any map. The bearded thug laughed, his laugh like a wheeze. Don't lie, old man, he said, pulling a Colt from his holster. We know that girl told you everything. You know where the map is, and we'll take it. The easy way or the hard way, we don't care. Jacob raised a hand. Wait, he said. Let's talk. But the leader had already signaled, and the other 2 bandits began to circle the ranch to approach from 2 sides. The leader remained standing in place, his hand on his holster. We don't talk, we take, he said. The bearded man was the first to fire. A bullet whizzed past Silas's head, hitting the wooden wall of the house. Silas fell to the ground, and at that very moment, Jacob's shot rang out. He fired quickly and accurately. The bearded thug fell to the ground, his eyes wide with surprise. The leader, not wasting any time, pulled out his Colt. He fired at Jacob, but Jacob managed to jump back, and the bullet hit the porch post. Silas got to his feet. He threw a handful of gravel at his opponent, and he, distracted for a moment, missed. That was enough. Silas pulled out his knife. He wasn't a good shot, but he was a master with a knife, and his movements were as fast as a snake's. He threw the knife, and it, glinting in the last rays of the sun, plunged into the leader's shoulder. He howled in pain and dropped his weapon. The last thug, who had come from the other side, tried to flank them, but Isabella, who had seen everything through the window, grabbed the old rifle that Jacob had left in the corner. It was heavy and clumsy, but she found the strength to lift it. She closed her eyes and fired. The rifle kicked back against her shoulder, and she nearly fell, but the bullet hit its mark. The thug collapsed to the ground. Isabella opened her eyes and saw that he was lying motionless. Silas and Jacob stepped forward. Silas went to the wounded leader. He pulled the knife from his shoulder, and he screamed in pain. Where's the map? Silas asked. The leader gritted his teeth. I don't have it, he rasped. He was the only one who knew. Silas realized he was talking about someone else. At that moment, the sound of hooves was heard. In the distance, from the direction of the mountains, several more riders appeared. Silas and Jacob exchanged glances. We don't have time, Jacob said. We have to leave, now. Jacob and Silas didn't waste time talking. The sound of hoofbeats was getting louder. Horses, Jacob shouted. Isabella, despite the shock, followed them, her bare feet sinking into the dust, and the old shirt dragging on the ground. Jacob grabbed her hand. Silas, take my horse. I'll go on foot with her, it'll be faster. In the mountains, you won't catch us. Take my horse and go. We'll meet at the camp. Silas hesitated, but he knew Jacob was right. He jumped on the horse and galloped toward the mountains. Without looking back, Jacob grabbed Isabella in his arms and ran. She was as light as a feather. He ran toward a gorge that led deep into Red Mountain. This place was known only to him. The gorge was narrow, and a few minutes later they were inside. Jacob lowered Isabella to the ground. Be quiet, he whispered. He held her close to his chest, and she flinched at his warmth. Meanwhile, Silas reached his camp, but no one was there. He went down into the mine, but no one was there either. He was alone. He knew they would come here, and he decided he had to leave. He hid all his things, taking only the essentials, a flask of water, an old revolver, and a few cartridges. He got out of the mine and headed for the gorge to meet Jacob. He walked quickly, like a ghost, without making a sound. A few minutes later, Silas saw the entrance to the gorge, and he went inside. He saw Jacob and Isabella sitting on the ground, huddled together. You're here, Jacob said. I knew you'd come back. Silas nodded. We have to leave, he said. They're close. Isabella lifted her head. I can't walk, she said, her voice faint. My legs. Jacob looked at her. Then we'll stay here, he said. This place. No one will find it. Silas looked at him. But what? What are we going to do? He asked. Jacob smiled. We'll wait, he said. We'll wait until they leave. And they waited. Day turned to night, and they sat in the darkness, seeing nothing but the stars. Silas made a small fire. The three of them sat, and none of them said a word. Who are you? Isabella asked, looking at Silas. You don't look like a prospector. Silas grinned. I've been everything you can imagine, but now I'm just a man who wants some quiet. He saw that she was shivering. Here, he said, taking off his cloak and wrapping her in it. She took it and for a moment pressed against him. Anything else? Silas asked, turning to Jacob. He shook his head. No, he said. I think we're safe, but I don't know what to do next. Silas looked at him. Do you know who he is? He asked. Jacob looked at him. He's the one who always stays in the shadows, the one who always gets what he wants. His name is the Shadow. Isabella flinched when she heard the name. She closed her eyes and pressed against Jacob. He was always with us, she whispered. He was always here. He was my father's friend. Isabella looked at the fire, her eyes filled with tears. I can't believe it, she whispered. Why would he do this? Jacob and Silas were silent. They knew there was no simple answer to that question. Jacob hugged Isabella, and she pressed against him, her body trembling. Calm down, he whispered. We'll figure it out. Silas went to the fire and threw a few branches in. The flames danced, illuminating his face. He always wanted more, Isabella said. He was always envious. He envied my father because he had something he didn't, a family. He was always alone, and he always wanted what others had. My father, he always said that the Shadow was a man who would do anything for money. Silas nodded. He knew people like that. He had seen them in every town, in every saloon. People who lived only for money and power. But why did he come back? Jacob asked. Why did he wait so long? Isabella shook her head. I don't know, she said. My father, he always said that the Shadow was like a ghost. He appears when you least expect him. Jacob and Silas exchanged glances. They understood they had been pulled into something much bigger than they could have imagined. We have to do something, Silas said. We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. Jacob nodded. You're right, he said. We have to find that map. It's the only thing we have. If we find it, maybe we can trade it for our lives. Isabella looked at him. But I don't know where it is, she said. My father, he hid it. He said. It was somewhere in the valley. Silas frowned. In the valley? He asked. That's too big an area. Isabella looked at him. He talked about a lighthouse, she said. About a lighthouse that always lights our way. Jacob and Silas exchanged glances. A lighthouse, Jacob asked. There's no lighthouse here. Isabella shook her head. He didn't mean a real lighthouse. He meant something else, something that he always talked about. Silas went to her. Think, he said. Think about what he always talked about, something that meant a lot to him. Isabella closed her eyes, trying to remember. He always talked about the old mill, she said. About the old mill that stands on the hill. Jacob and Silas exchanged glances. They knew where that mill was. It was a few miles away from them, on the other side of the valley. There might be something there, Silas said. The map might be there. At that moment, they heard a nose. The nose was getting louder. They knew it wasn't animals, it was people. Isabella flinched. They found us, she whispered. Jacob pulled out his Colt. We have to leave, he said. Now. They stood up and ran. They ran toward the exit of the gorge. When they saw silhouettes on the hills in front of them, they froze. The entrance to the gorge was blocked, and the sound of hoofbeats came from behind. The silhouettes on the hills weren't just men. They were heavily armed mercenaries, searching for them. They had neither time nor room to maneuver. Jacob looked at the steep canyon walls, then at Isabella, and his face darkened. Only one way, he whispered, his voice as cold as the wind that swept through these rocks. Up. He pointed to a narrow, barely noticeable crack in the rock. It was not a path, but rather a fissure where water once flowed. Silas, looking closely, saw that it was too narrow even for one person, but Jacob already knew what to do. He pressed himself against the wall, felt for the ledges, and began to climb, like a mountain goat. Isabella followed him, but her fragile hands and bare feet were not suited for such a test. The rock scraped her skin, leaving red streaks behind, and she barely suppressed a groan of pain. Silas, noticing her suffering, climbed up, threw her a rope, and pulled her up as if she were as light as a feather. Silas and Jacob moved forward, their movements synchronized. They jumped across deep fissures, clung to ledges, and crawled along narrow rock faces, while the noise below grew louder. They heard voices that echoed throughout the gorge, and they realized that the mercenaries had entered the canyon. Silas pressed himself against the wall and listened, his heart pounding in his chest. He heard them discussing that there was no way out here. They're gone, one of them said. We need to leave. There's somewhere else. Silas let out a sigh of relief. They made it to the top of the canyon, and a stunning view opened up before them. Below them, a boundless valley stretched out. In the rays of the rising sun, which painted the sky a bright red, they saw in the distance a small hill on which stood an old mill. The red mill, Isabella whispered. That's what my father talked about. The mill where he worked. Silas and Jacob exchanged glances. So, the map is there, Silas said, but we can't go there now. Jacob nodded. We have to wait until they're gone. We'll wait here. And they waited. They sat on the top of the canyon, in the shadow of a huge rock, and looked at the valley. They were safe, but they were in danger. They knew the mercenaries would be back, and they knew they would have to act quickly. They were like ghosts in these mountains, and they were ready for them to be found. They were ready for any battle. But what will we do if they find us? Isabella whispered. Silas smiled. We'll fight, he said. We'll fight to the end. Silas, Jacob, and Isabella spent the whole night on the top of the canyon, watching the valley. At the first rays of the sun, they descended. Isabella was weak, and Silas carried her on his back. Jacob walked in front, examining every bush and rock. They moved slowly but surely, staying in the shadows to avoid being seen. Finally, they reached the old mill. The windmill was old, its blades were broken, and its walls were ruined. The wind wandered through its corridors, and it seemed as if it was sighing. Inside the mill, it was dark, and it smelled of old wood and dust. Silas took out his lantern, and they went inside. They saw that inside there were old sacks, broken tools, and empty boxes. I don't think there's anything here, Isabella whispered. Silas and Jacob began to search every corner of the mill, but found nothing. He wouldn't have hidden it here, Silas said. It's too simple. He would have hidden it where no one would look. Isabella nodded. My father, he always said that the lighthouse is something no one sees, but everyone knows. Jacob and Silas exchanged glances. A lighthouse no one sees? Jacob asked. What could that be? Isabella was staring at the wall. Her eyes were empty. She suddenly screamed. I remember, she said. My father, he always said that the lighthouse is his heart. Silas and Jacob looked at her. Heart? Silas asked. What do you mean? Isabella ran to the wall and began to scratch it. It's not a wall, she said. It's a map. Silas and Jacob went up to her. They saw that the wall was made of many small stones that were fitted together. Isabella began to pull out the stones, and Silas realized that she wasn't just pulling out stones. She was pulling them out in a certain order. After a few minutes, a large hole appeared on the wall. Inside the hole was an old, wooden box. Isabella took it out and opened it. Inside lay a golden map. It was made of pure gold, and a map was engraved on it that led to what they realized was a lost gold mine. It's a map, Isabella whispered. A map to my father's gold. Jacob and Silas exchanged glances. They realized that this was what they needed. This was what they were looking for, but they were not ready for what awaited them. At that moment, they heard a voice. The voice was old, and it was full of malice. Finally, the voice said, I've been waiting for so long. They turned and saw a man who stood in the shadows. He was tall and thin. His face was covered in wrinkles, and his eyes were full of hatred. Shadow, Jacob whispered. You're here. Yes. Shadow said, I am always here. I have always waited for you to return, Jacob. I have always waited for you to bring me what belongs to me. Silas pulled out his revolver. Don't move, he said. Or else. Shadow laughed. Or else what? Do you think you can stop me? You don't know who I am. I am what you fear. I am what will destroy you. Silas stood motionless, his revolver aimed directly at Shadow, but the villain showed no fear. He just smiled contemptuously, his wrinkled face distorted with greed. You think your little gun can do anything to me? He hissed. You don't know who you're messing with. This map. It's my by right. I worked with her father when he was just starting out. We were partners, friends. And then he found this mine, and disappeared. Left me with nothing. Isabella squeezed the golden map in her hands. My father was never greedy, she said, her voice trembling with anger. He always shared with everyone. Lies, Shadow roared. He betrayed me. He took all the gold and left me to rot in poverty. And now his daughter thinks she can just come and take what belongs to me. He took a step forward. Give me the map, and maybe I'll let you live. Silas, don't do it. Isabella screamed. I'd listen to the gorilla if I were you, Shadow sneered. At that moment, Silas, without a second thought, threw his lantern. The kerosene spilled on the floor immediately burst into flames, and the fire began to spread quickly. A scream echoed in the darkness of the mill. The mercenaries standing behind Shadow became worried. Shadow, momentarily blinded and confused, began to retreat. Run, Silas shouted. He grabbed Isabella's hand, and they ran to the exit, pursued by tons of fire. Jacob followed behind them, covering their retreat. They heard screams, gunshots, and curses from behind. The old mill building was on fire, and they knew they had very little time. They ran outside, and the fresh air hit their faces. They caught their breath, but then they saw that Shadow's mercenaries had already surrounded the mill. They were trapped. Shadow emerged from the fire, his face covered in soot. You thought you could trick me, he rasped. You thought I would just give up. No, this map, it belongs to me, and I'll take it, at any cost. Jacob and Silas stood in front of Isabella. They knew they had no other way out. They were ready to fight, and they knew that a long and bloody battle awaited them. They were outnumbered. They had no chance, but they didn't give up. They were ready to fight for their lives, for their freedom, for their golden map. Give me the map, and I might spare your lives. With these words, Shadow took a step forward, and his mercenaries began to slowly close the circle. Silas understood that a direct confrontation was doomed to fail. He looked around the mill. The fire had already engulfed the lower wooden beams, and the heat became unbearable. Thick, acrid smoke rose to the sky, hiding them from the mercenaries. Jacob, standing behind him, looked at Silas and gave a barely noticeable nod. They understood each other without words. Suddenly, Silas rushed forward, but not towards Shadow, but to the side. He headed for the crooked windmill wheel. Isabella, holding the golden map in her hands, followed him. Where are you going? Shadow shouted. Silas, running up to the wheel, began to push it, but it wouldn't move. Then Jacob, jumping up to them, hit the wheel with all his might. With a creak, It began to slowly rotate. Silas turned around and saw that the mercenaries had started shooting at them. And Shadow, with insane rage in his eyes, was running directly at them. Shadow was already within arm's reach when the wheel spun, and Silas, grabbing Isabella's hand, jumped onto one of its blades. "Jacob!" he shouted. Jacob followed them. The wheel, making a terrible turn, and they found themselves several meters above the ground. The mercenaries, not expecting such a maneuver, froze in amazement, and Shadow stopped, staring at them with unconcealed anger. At that moment, as the wheel began to move again, Silas, Jacob, and Isabella jumped to the ground. They fell into the thick grass and, without losing a second, ran forward. They heard screams behind them, but they didn't look back. They ran, not knowing where, just to get away from here. They ran until they lost their strength. They stopped at an old stream. Shadow and his mercenaries were far behind. Isabella, breathing heavily, looked at Silas. "Thank you," she said. "You saved me." Silas smiled. "We're safe," he said, "for now." Jacob, looking around, saw a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. "Looks like this is a good place to rest," he said. They went inside. It was dark and damp, but at the same time, it was safe. They sat on the ground. Isabella took out the map and placed it on the ground. "What are we going to do now?" she asked. Silas and Jacob looked at the map. They realized that it wasn't just a map, it was a key to something bigger. It was a key to a secret that Isabella might not be able to uncover herself. "We have to go on," Silas said. "We have to find what your father was looking for." Isabella nodded. "I know where it is," she whispered, pointing to a place on the map that was marked with a coded symbol. It's in the Valley of Oblivion, where no one ever returns." Silas, Jacob, and Isabella came out of the cave, and before their eyes lay the Valley of Oblivion. It was huge and empty. Nothing grew, and only the wind wandered through its expanses, spreading dry sand. The horizon was shrouded in a purple mist that hid the mountains and the sky from them. They walked forward. Each step on the sand was like a step into eternity. I've never been here," Isabella whispered. "But my father always talked about it. He said it was a place where time stood still, a place where the past, present, and future exist simultaneously." Silas and Jacob exchanged glances. They didn't understand what she was saying, but there was something in her voice that made them believe. They continued to walk forward, but soon realized that they were not alone. Ahead of them, out of the mist, figures slowly appeared. They were tall and thin. Their bodies were covered in dirty clothes, and their faces were hidden under hoods. They moved silently, like shadows, and it seemed that they didn't touch the ground. "Who are they?" Jacob whispered, pulling out his dagger. "I don't know," Silas said, taking out his revolver. The figures came closer, and Silas realized that they were not mercenaries. Their eyes were empty. These were not living creatures. They were ghosts. They are here to guard the valley," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "My father said they won't let anyone pass." Silas and Jacob were horrified. "How can you fight ghosts?" They took a step back, but the ghosts began to surround them. "What are we going to do?" Jacob asked, his voice shaking. Silas looked around. They were surrounded, and they had no other way out. "I think I know," Silas said. He looked at Isabella. "Your father said this is a place where time stood still, so we need to make it move." He took out his golden map and touched it to the sand. Nothing happened. Then he began to draw on the sand. He drew a map. He drew what was on the golden map, but he drew it with his mind. And when he finished, all the ghosts froze. The whole valley froze, and Silas realized what he had done. He had stopped time. And now, they had a chance. But for how long? And what awaited them next? Time had stopped. It was a strange and frightening feeling. Neither wind nor sounds disturbed the absolute silence. The ghosts, frozen in mid-motion, looked like absurd sculptures in this silent museum. Silas, Jacob, and Isabella could move, but each of their steps seemed to lag in this silence. Silas, holding the golden map in his hand, headed for the nearest ghost. He reached out his hand, but he couldn't touch the ghost. It was like a hard rock, motionless and cold. They are the embodiment of time," Isabella whispered, her voice sounding like an echo. "Each of them is a second that has frozen forever. To pass, we need to make them move. And to make them move, we need to find the source of their power." Silas looked at the golden map. He realized that there was something else on it besides the map. There was a symbol, similar to an hourglass, that was hidden. He looked at the ghost and understood. The hourglass symbol was drawn on the ghost's chest. "There it is," Silas said. "The key to their power. We must find this symbol on each ghost and activate it." Jacob and Isabella agreed. They split up and began to look for the symbols. Silas found the symbol on the chest of a ghost that looked like a warrior holding a spear. He touched the symbol, and it lit up. The ghost began to move slowly, and Silas realized that he had moved time by 1 second. They repeated this again and again. They looked for the symbols, activated them, and the ghosts began to move, but only for a moment, before freezing again. They worked like crazy, moving from one ghost to another. They knew they didn't have much time, because Shadow and his mercenaries could appear at any second. When they activated the last symbol, the whole valley shuddered. Time began to move, but it was moving in reverse. Isabella, Silas, and Jacob saw the wind blowing backward, the sand rising and returning to its place, and the ghosts. They began to disappear. But something else, something big, something ancient, appeared from under the ground. It was a huge stone pillar on which the same hourglass symbol was carved, but much larger, and Silas realized that this was the source of power. He saw that in the center of the pillar there was a recess, where the golden map fit perfectly, and when he saw this, he felt someone touch his shoulder. He turned around and saw that it was Shadow. He stood there, in the smoke and fire, and his eyes were glowing with rage. "You thought you could trick me," he hissed. "You thought I wouldn't find you. I knew you would come back here. Because this is your only weak spot, so that's why you didn't kill us," Isabella hissed, looking at Shadow. "You wanted us to open the way for you." Shadow laughed. "You're too smart for your age, girl. Your father was the same, and that's what ruined him." He looked at Silas. "Now, give me the map." Silas took a step back, shielding Isabella. He knew that fighting Shadow was insane, but there was no other way out. "Your game is over, Shadow," Silas said. "This map doesn't belong to you." Shadow laughed again, but this time his laughter was full of hatred. "You're wrong, Bo. This map is my inheritance. It's what my father stole from me." With these words, he rushed at Silas. Their fight was quick and furious. Silas, thanks to his agility, was able to dodge the first blows, but Shadow was stronger and more experienced. He hit Silas in the stomach, and he fell to the ground. Isabella, seeing this, rushed at Shadow, but he easily pushed her away. At that moment, Jacob, who had been standing at a distance all this time, threw his dagger. The dagger hit Shadow's leg, and he howled in pain. That was enough for Silas to get up. He grabbed Isabella's hand. "Run," he shouted. They ran to the pillar. Shadow pulled out the dagger and rushed after them. They ran to the pillar. Silas, without losing a second, inserted the map into the recess. The map lit up, and the whole pillar began to tremble. "No!" Shadow screamed. He rushed forward, trying to stop them, but it was too late. The stone pillar began to slowly rise from the ground, and an entrance to the treasury opened underneath it. The door of the treasury, made of pure gold, lit up. Isabella, Silas, and Jacob went up to it. They opened the door and saw that inside there were not gold and precious stones, but books, scrolls, and ancient artifacts. And in the middle of the room stood a large chest. Isabella went up to it and opened it. Inside lay a single book. She opened it. It was her father's diary. In it were records about the Valley of Oblivion, about the ghosts, and about the fact that the key to the treasure was not gold and precious stones, but knowledge. Isabella cried. She realized that her father was not a greedy man. He was a keeper of knowledge. At that moment, Shadow's voice was heard from behind them. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "This isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I killed for." Silas looked at Shadow and saw that there was no longer any rage in his eyes, only emptiness. Shadow turned and, without saying a word, left. Isabella, Silas, and Jacob came out of the treasury. They sat on the steps and watched the sun rise. Isabella smiled. "Thank you," she said. "You saved me." Silas smiled back. "We're safe," he said, "for now." They sat there, watching the sun rise above the horizon, and realized that this was only the beginning of their adventures. After Shadow left, silence reigned. It was broken only by the wind, which seemed to carry echoes of the past. Silas, Isabella, and Jacob sat at the entrance to the treasury, looking at the diary. This was not just a book, but a whole chronicle. On its pages, Isabella's father, whose name was Alexander, left his thoughts, knowledge, and warnings. He described the Valley of Oblivion not as a cursed place, but as an ancient mechanism created to protect against those who wanted to abuse power. Isabella read, and her eyes filled with tears. She learned about Shadow, whose real name was Leonard. He was not just her father's friend, but his student and right hand. They searched for knowledge together, until Leonard became obsessed with the idea of using the power of ancient mechanisms for personal gain. He wanted to turn back time, and bring back his family, whom he had lost in an accident. Alexander, trying to stop him, hid the golden map and escaped. He was sure that Leonard would look for them, but he didn't know how far his former friend would go. Jacob and Silas listened in silence. They realized that they were just pawns in this game, but now they had a choice. They could leave everything as it was and return to their normal lives, or they could continue the path that Alexander had started. "I can't just leave," Isabella said. "My father sacrificed his life for this knowledge. I can't let it fall into the hands of someone who wants to abuse it." Silas and Jacob exchanged glances. They both knew that their lives had changed forever. Isabella turned the last page of the diary. A map was drawn on it. It was not a map of the Valley of Oblivion, but a map of the world. Various places were marked on it, and next to each place was the same symbol as on the golden map. He left us a path," Isabella whispered. "This is not the end. This is just the beginning. We need to find these places and protect them." Silas looked at Jacob. "What do you think?" he asked. Jacob smiled. "I don't know what you think, but I'm in. I've never been so close to a real adventure. I'm tired of working for someone who doesn't appreciate me. And now, I know this is the right thing to do." Silas smiled. He looked at Isabella. "And you, what are you going to do?" he asked. I'm going to do what my father did. I'm going to keep this knowledge and protect it from those who want to abuse it. And I won't be alone. I have you guys. We're a team." With these words, she got up. Silas and Jacob got up with her. They were ready. They were ready for their new adventure. They left the Valley of Oblivion at dawn. Behind them was not only a long journey, but also a difficult battle that changed their lives. Isabella, holding her father's diary, felt that she was carrying the burden of a huge responsibility. Silas, clenching the golden map in his hand, understood that his life, full of routine, was far in the past. Jacob, as always, was ready for new adventures, but now a new sparkle appeared in his eyes. The sparkle of determination. The journey west was long. They walked through fields and forests, crossed rivers, and climbed mountains. Each new place marked on Alexander's map was a mystery. They knew that a new danger, as well as the key to new knowledge, awaited them there. Jacob, thanks to his observation skills, noticed that someone was following them. It wasn't Shadow, but someone else who seemed to know their every move. They decided to be careful and not take any risks. Their first goal was an abandoned city located in the Great Forest. On the map, this city was marked with a symbol resembling an ancient compass. They reached the city by noon. It was a gloomy place. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs, and the tall, moss-covered buildings seemed to be alive. They entered the city, and Silas felt someone touch his shoulder. He turned around and saw that it was none other than an old man who looked like the guardian of the city. "I've been waiting for you," the old man whispered. His voice was like the rustling of leaves. "You are the ones Alexander spoke of. You have come for the key." Silas and his friends exchanged glances. They were surprised, but at the same time happy. They had found the first guardian. The old man led them to an ancient library. It was a huge room full of books, scrolls, and artifacts. "The key is here," the old man said, "but it is guarded by ancient spells. To get it, you must answer a riddle." The old man pointed to a large chest that was locked with a huge lock. The same symbol that was on the map was engraved on the lock. "To open it, you must answer a riddle," the old man repeated. "I am the one who always follows you. I am the one who will always be with you." "What am I?" Silas, Jacob, and Isabella thought. The riddle seemed simple, but they knew there was a trick. Silas, Jacob, and Isabella stood in front of the locked chest, surrounded by ancient books and scrolls. The old guardian, his face etched with wrinkles like the bark of an old tree, patiently waited for their answer. "I am the one who always follows you. I am the one who will always be with you." "What am I?" he repeated. Isabella was the first to break the silence. "The hint is that it's something intangible, but constant. Something that cannot be lost, but can be forgotten," she muttered. Jacob, who always relied on his instincts rather than his mind, looked at his shadow falling on the floor. "Shadow," he said. The old man shook his head. "Ron, a shadow can be lost when there is no light. A shadow can be changed when the shape changes. This is not what I am looking for." Silas, who had been silent all this time, thought about the old man's words. "I am the one who always follows you. I am the one who will always be with you." He remembered the conversation with Isabella and her father. He remembered how Alexander said that the key to the treasure was not gold, but knowledge. "I know the answer," Silas said. "It's knowledge." The old man smiled. "Ron, knowledge can be forgotten. It can be stolen. I'm looking for something that can't be forgotten and can't be stolen." They fell into silence again. They looked at each other. The riddle, which seemed so simple, turned out to be incredibly difficult. Suddenly, Isabella clapped her hands. "I know the answer," she shouted. "It's memory. It's what always follows us. It's what will always be with us. We can forget something, but memory will always be in our minds." The old man shook his head. "Ron, memory can be distorted. It can be changed." Silas, who had been silent all this time, looked at his hands. He remembered Alexander's words. He remembered how his father said that the key to the treasure was not knowledge, but "I know the answer," Silas said. "It's experience. It's what always follows us. It's what will always be with us. It cannot be forgotten. It cannot be stolen. It is what we take away from every situation." The old man smiled. He looked at Jacob. "What do you think?" he asked. Jacob smiled. "I don't know. But I think we're on the right track." With these words, the old man took a key out of his pocket and inserted it into the lock. The lock clicked, and the chest opened. Inside lay a scroll. Silas took it in his hands and unrolled it. A map was drawn on the scroll. It was not a map of the world, but a map of the sky. "This is the key to the next place," the old man said. "This is a map of the stars. It will show you the way, but be careful, you are still being watched." With these words, he disappeared as if he had never been there. The heroes left the library. The sun was already setting, and the sky was colored in crimson shades. They were alone again. They didn't know what to do next, but they had a map of the stars that could lead them to the next key. At that moment, they heard a voice. "Silas." He turned around and saw that it was none other than his father. "I'm here," he said. "I knew you would come." Silas stood, stunned. Before him, like a ghost from the past, his father appeared. He looked the same as he did in his childhood memories, only his eyes were glowing with an unearthly light. "I'm here, son. I knew you would come. You were always special," his father said, and his voice sounded the same as in his childhood. But how was all Silas could manage? I didn't die. I just went to another dimension. This place is a kind of transit point where time and space lose their meaning. I created this place to protect knowledge from those who want to use it for evil. I was waiting for you. I need you to continue my work." Silas couldn't believe his ears. His father, whom he thought had been dead for a long time, was actually alive and was the guardian of this place. "What about Leonard?" Silas asked. He was my best student," his father said. "But he went down a dark path. He wanted to use the power of the ancient mechanisms for personal gain. I couldn't let him do that, so I hid the map and escaped." "But why didn't you tell me this before?" Silas asked. "I couldn't. I had to make sure you were ready for it, and apparently, you were ready. Now you are the new guardian. You must continue my work and find the remaining keys." Silas's father took another scroll out of his pocket. It was a map. But it was not a map of the stars, but a map of the world, on which all the places where the keys were hidden were marked. "This is your mission," he said. "You must find them all and protect them from those who want to use them for evil." Silas took the scroll and looked at it. Many places were marked on the map. He knew that it would be a long and dangerous journey, but he was ready. He looked at his father. "I'll do it," he said. "I know. Now go. Your friends are waiting for you." Silas turned around and saw that Isabel and Jacob were waiting for him. They looked very excited. "What happened?" Isabella asked. "What did your father tell you?" Silas smiled. "He said that we are the new guardians, and that we must continue his work." Isabella and Jacob exchanged glances, and their faces lit up with smiles. "Well," Jacob said, "in that case, we need to find the next key." Isabella unrolled the map. "The next key is in the heart of the desert. We need to go there." They were on their way again. This time, They knew what awaited them, that they were ready for it. After all, now they had a goal. They were a team. "Are we ready?" Silas asked. "We're ready," Isabel and Jacob replied. They walked forward, towards a new adventure. The desert was huge and unforgiving. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the wind scorched their faces. But they walked forward, following the instructions on the map. Isabella, Jacob, and Silas, a team that was now bound not only by common adventures, but also by a deep friendship. They had learned to trust each other, and that trust became their greatest strength. The path to the heart of the desert was long, but they did not give up. They overcame sandstorms, found shelter in abandoned ruins, and solved ancient riddles that they encountered on their way. Finally, they reached a huge oasis that was marked on the map. The last key was waiting for them there. It was a huge temple that was carved directly into the rock. They entered the temple and found themselves in a huge hall where there were many statues and ancient artifacts. They went to the center of the hall and saw a huge statue that was holding a small crystal in its hand. This was the last key, but when they approached it, it suddenly began to glow. Then it split into 3 parts and flew towards them. One part of the crystal landed on Silas's hand, the second on Jacob's hand, and the third on Isabella's hand. They felt a huge stream of energy enter their bodies. They were no longer ordinary people. They became guardians, new guardians. They could feel each other, even if they were at a great distance. They came out of the temple. The sun was already setting, and the sky was colored in crimson shades. They were on their way again. This time, they knew what awaited them, that they were ready for it. After all, now they had a goal. They were a team. They were guardians. "Are we ready?" Silas asked. "We're ready," Isabel and Jacob replied. They walked forward, towards a new adventure.